Yeah, we're here to help talk about helping couples connect deeply as God intended. I'm going to read the first couple sentences there. We'll come back to them again. But naked without shame instructs that God's intention for couples was that each spouse was to be known completely by the other. Naked. Figurative naked in that case. It was also literally true. And yet completely accepted. But this deepest of connections cannot be experienced in the same way as it was in the garden, since sin and its brokenness entered our world and into our relationships. But nevertheless, the goal for spouses is still to be deeply connected. And part of God's redemptive work is to be working in our lives on a regular, daily, constant basis to be more and more transformed into what He has for us, to be deeply connected. I believe that's a centerpiece of the Christian life. One of the greatest pictures of that is the Trinity. What I'm about to say may sound like, wow, that man knows a lot of theology. Well, it's been given to me. I'm repeating. I'm a parrot in this moment, actually. I have the wonderful fortune of the last 5.5 years, 11 semesters, of being in the room teaching with a systematic theologian, a theology course that is also the Foundations of Counseling course. So it's the theology of God and the theology of people, of humanity, which are really the foundations of counseling. And in that, we spend a good bit of time on the Trinity and that doctrine of God portion. Mike Williams, that I teach with, goes through the history of the understanding of the Trinity that was started really in the Old Testament. There's not very much that gives, not very many hints. There are a few, but there are hints of our Trinitarian God. In the New Testament, you have this, what became a problem for Old Testament thinkers who were thinking the point is there's one God. And then Jesus shows up. And how do you fit Him, the God-man, with this Old Testament over-reading that there's one God? And that was a real struggle for people. And it continued for centuries as to how do we figure this out? And in the more clearly in the New Testament, the Spirit as well. Not a lot is said about the Spirit, but He's recognized there. 3 Greek scholars, Cappadocia, someone here might know where that is better than I do. They're called the Fathers of Cappadocia, I think I have that right. Were primarily responsible for developing the idea of the social Trinity. They started more with the 3 that was one than the one that somehow was 3, and ended up describing the Trinity differently. One of the things they said about the 3 persons of the Trinity is that they interpenetrate, that they relate so closely and consistently and regularly that they, in essence, interpenetrate. They do not lose their distinction. It's not that they get all mixed up and they all become the same. It's the 3 who are one because they're in this process of constantly relating. They end up using a Greek word to talk about that relational process of the 3 persons that means to dance in relationship with each other. So if I could transport you to our classroom, one of the things you would see is Mike Williams, who's put the Father and the Son and the Spirit, and he starts drawing circles and keeps drawing circles to show the relationship between the Father and the Son and the Spirit and the Father, and keeps drawing those circles to say, this is the dance constantly happening. forever. These three that are one. Now one of the reasons that is so helpful is it helps us be able to grasp in our human minds that are finite this relational dance of the Trinity. The three are simultaneously distinct and interdependent. It's that 3-1, distinct 3, interdependent, so intensely interdependent 1, that you can't do that mathematically. The three that are one, it's not a mathematical question. But it's hard for us to go for it to fit into our minds. To put it in terms of the three that are dancing and interpenetrate in that dance process helps us. This full connection yet distinct relational dance is the operative principle of the universe. In other words, relationality exists in everything. We see it in everything, actually. That God, this in his very nature, is relational. We see in the Trinity. In the universe that he created that reflects his glory, part of the way it reflects his glory is everything's relational. I don't think the man was a believer, but fairly recently read a book where a man was talking about I forget the point he was making, but his illustration was, if you can imagine this as a piece of paper as a piece of wood, used to be, if you're going to make something out of this piece of wood, you can't come to this wood and just enforce your will on it and make it into anything you want it to be. You actually have to come to it and, in a sense, relate to it and what it is in that process of making it into something useful. I mean, this particular flat 9 by 11, 8.5 by 11, sorry, I just turned British or something almost, huh? Can only be certain things, right? This flat little piece could make a great cover for some box that I might make with some other pieces of wood. But in making that decision, I'm in a relationship with it. What is it telling me about itself? It's what am I observing, but in a sense, it's not just a one-way thing. Realistically, yes, in part, but I'm entering into a relationship with this to observe it, to listen to it, I put that in quotes, to pay attention, as I make those decisions about what is this going to become? I can't do that independently and just do it with my power. That's true in all kinds of things. So everything is in relationship with God, of course, but with other things in the universe as well. Which gives us the foundation to be able to say people grow and are transformed in and through relationships. As counselors, that's probably the most important theological concept that we can embrace. People are made in relationship. God set it up that way. The Bible itself is God telling us a story. That's a relational act, to tell a story. Telling a story is drawing a picture of all the players and how they relate to each other. If you view a piece of art, you're viewing the relationship between the elements. It's a way of communicating that's much fuller than just listing propositions. In our modern world, often we look at the Bible as a list of propositions. Tell me the things that are true, then I'll know the right things to do. We can make the mistake of approaching our counseling that way. Tell me the right things to do. Couples can come to us and they're struggling and they can be feeling like what they need is to be told the right things to do. That can be helpful. We call it cognitive behavioral counseling. learning new information, wrestling with what kind of assumptions have I been working out of, acting out of, and evaluating those and changing those, that can be helpful. I don't want to throw that out. But it's incomplete because as people, we operate in a whole way, and optimum or human flourishing happens most when what we think and what we feel work together. And if couples come to us and they're looking for change and we help them in that way, we haven't necessarily helped them with the connection between each other. Probably haven't helped them with that connection. So Trinity as picture of the ultimate connection is really why I'm putting that up there. Point 2, God's goal for persons and God's goal for couples. Naked without shame. Mentioned that already. That spouses are completely known by the other and yet completely accepted. I think the completely known is the hard piece, particularly around those things that we feel that are shameful or that we're uncertain about, that we're not sure will be accepted if we share them. Part of the challenge with this is so much of what I just said is it's unconscious. We don't realize that we're hesitant. We don't realize that we feel shame about things that we feel. As an example, I think I've shared somewhere before is that my father died when I was a young child, and I experienced that as abandonment. I didn't know that. I think it was in college, which would have been about 15 years later, that I started to realize that. But I didn't know that it made any difference in my present life. I just looked at that as, that's how I experienced that. I think I might have jokingly said at times, I have issues with abandonment. I didn't even know what it meant, actually. And it was then another 15 years later or 20 years later, married, living in the house that we live in now, so it had to be within the last 30 years. So the middle of my life. I'm sitting at the computer in our kitchen and doing some work. We live out in the country, and back then it was really country. And that meant we burned our trash. We had a big 55-gallon oil drum, empty of course, out in the yard. We have a big yard, 5 acres of land's not worth much, but I would take that out and put it in that drum and light a match and set it on fire and burn the trash. I don't remember what we did with the garbage. Carol Ann's come in and asked, will you take out the trash? She's walked through the kitchen, trash cans full. Will you take out the trash? Sure. She walks out. I keep working. Fully intend to finish that thing that I'm doing there and then do the trash. Forgot. Keep working. She comes through later. Oh, will you take out the trash? She asked me again. She might have asked nicely. She might have been a little perturbed. I don't remember. I would have said back then that makes a difference. It doesn't, actually. But when she asked that second time, I'd get mad at her. If she didn't ask quite nicely, I might be mad about that. That might be what I'm saying. It's like, wow, I need a little more patience from you or something. And we'd have this argument. She'd defend herself. I'm just asking you to take out the trash or whatever she would say. And we'd have that argument. I don't remember how it happened, what the instrument was, but there came a point where I realized someone must have helped me with this. I realized that there was a reason that I wasn't thinking about of why I was reactive to Carol Ann's simple repeating of the question. And something was going on in me each time anything like that happened that I didn't think about. I pushed it down, but it still happened. And my conclusion from the death of my father, feeling like abandonment, from some distance from my mother, feeling like abandonment, from that boss that didn't understand me and threatened to fire me, feeling like abandonment or betrayal, similar idea, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My conclusion was, and then there's that girlfriend, and there's that friend who got to know me and then went away. My conclusion was, if you get to know me, you're not staying. I'm not worth that much. That was the sort of message in my heart. So I'm sitting at my computer, my wife said, will you take the trash out? And I say yes, and then I don't do it. And my wife repeats, will you take the trash out? I'm scared. She's just discovered something about me. I don't come through. She's not going to hang around. Now, that's all going on down there in the dark. And I'm scared. And so what do I do to try to prevent her from going away? I get upset with her for exposing me the way that I really am. And try to sort of move her away from any conclusion that she might draw from that, because she's making a mistake. It's all operating in the dark. I don't know that. It's a habit. What are habits? They're things you do without thinking. That doesn't look anything like being completely known. That was not that young a man, 30s, early 30s, afraid to be known. Because afraid I wouldn't be accepted. That principle is operating all the time. Many of us are working out of the opposite of it. We're afraid to be known. Because we've already experienced in some way that we're not accepted if we're known. So it's easy to say that. Yeah, naked without shame, that makes sense. Completely known, oh, that'd be wonderful. Oh, we do that. It's harder than you think. Because there are hindrances. Cannot be experienced in the same way since sin and its brokenness entered the world. So there are sinful attitudes. In my example there of myself, you probably don't have to think for 10 seconds and kind of go, that was all about Dan. What was going on in me as Carolyn asked me a simple question, will you take out the trash, was all about me. As we've talked about in the EFT therapy, the attachment ideas of, am I safe? See, I wasn't feeling very safe, like ever, because of those abandonment-shaped attitudes. Is she really engaged with me? It wasn't even a question. Can I trust her? No, because I couldn't trust me. I couldn't trust anybody, actually, in a very real sense. So it becomes a me first. One of the ways that me first comes out is control. Trying to control things. My reactions and anger of against Carol Ann or toward Carol Ann were really about trying to control her responses. So much of control is trying to get a hold of being safe, trying to manufacture being safe. When the truth is, safety, true safety, really only comes when the other person engages and you experience them as accepting you, even though they know you. Now you're safe. Now you can trust them. You can trust they're going to stay. Even though they're engaged, know you so well. Other sinful attitudes, fear of trusting others. Another big hindrance is defensiveness. Defensiveness equals a declaration that the person is not willing to listen. That isn't written clearly. When I'm defensive, when you're defensive, it's like declaring, I'm not really listening to you, I'm just protecting myself. In my silly, simple little example of taking the trash out, when I get caught in forgetting and I get defensive. In that case, the defense was more an attack to distract from what I had done. I mean, in that moment, it's as if I'm saying, I'm not listening to you because the most important thing is me and me being safe. So defensiveness is a huge hindrance, and part of what's complicated with this is I don't believe defensiveness is a result of the fall. It's probably twisted as a result of the fall. But that capacity to protect ourselves seems necessary in a world that is not for you necessarily. Of course, the fall and the brokenness in the relationships in the world makes it more necessary to defend the way that we do. But particularly when you see defensiveness in a process of grieving losses, including relational losses, you can see its helpfulness. You can see how it's not helpful when we get stuck in defensiveness. See, my illustration is that defensiveness in some way served me as I was growing up in an environment that wasn't very responsive emotionally. So in a defensiveness, I shut things down and didn't feel them well. That worked for me to survive and to move on. But I mean, shut those things down when Caroline's asking me simple questions. I don't even know what's motivating my reactions. That's when those defenses are not serving me anymore, but I'm stuck in them. So defenses is a big problem. Another hindrance is relationship failure in families and society. I think you probably understand that. Our models are not always models of safety or models of good connection. And it changes how we think, that should be, not think about getting married and staying married. I believe we're making our decisions about marriage in quite defensive ways. Looking for the best bet, looking for the safest track. I played in the other session earlier this morning a song by Andrew Peterson, who I believe is, some of you know Andrew. And it's an older song, it's about 10 years old, Dancing in the Minefields. It's his description of marriage. And his idea is, we got married, and this is harder than we thought it would be. But he says, but that's what the promise is for. So we go dancing in the minefields. We go sailing through the storm. Which is a wonderful, positive picture of the idea that even though marriage is hard, those hard things are good things for us that we can learn to actually dance together in that hard times and in those struggles. That's a great, great picture. You know, it's a different thing to be thinking as you go into marriage. This is going to be hard. But I see in this person someone that can dance with me. He's going to hang on to me. And we're going to figure out how to do the steps together as we go through the hardest of times, the dangerous times. Even sometimes when things explode, we're going to hang on and keep dancing. And that's a wonderful picture. And that's not putting marriage in a negative, pessimistic place. It's putting it in a very optimistic description. But the relationship failure we've had in our families for so many years, at least half a century, changes how we think. So we tend to think, I want to find somebody that's safe. Somebody that will make life smooth, make life easy. And we may think we found that person, and a lot of us get surprised. It's not saying that there can't be those relationships that are easier. There are. But life is not going to treat you easily for all of it. It's just not going to be that way. You might think back if you were in the morning plenary, 2 days ago, I think, our speaker talked about 2 Corinthians chapter 4, where Paul wrestles with all of these afflictions that have come into his life. And he ended up summarizing it as, so I carry death in my body. What a picture. Now, I have to be honest that for most of my life, I've looked at that as, well, that was for the Apostle Paul. You know, he had a special role. And yeah, it had to be like that for him. Now, at this point in my life, I'm like, oh boy, it sure has felt like that. And the truth is, because of that, I've gotten pretty weary. That's one thing, tired, and downhearted and wrestling with that. But to hear that passage again and to hear our speaker be talking about, so Paul is saying, so I carry death in my body in order that the life of Christ can be reflected in my body as well. And that the two, in a sense, are necessary to be together. That changes it. That looks different. And maybe even marriage is like that too. That there'll be some things that feels like your spouse is bringing death. There'll be some problems that are unsolvable. If you're young, just preparing to marry, I know at least one of you are in that position. The last thing you really want to hear is what I'm talking about. You know, it's like, no, you don't understand her. You know, it's like, she's great. Yes, she is. But Andrew's right. Andrew Peterson's right. And that's not just normal, it's right in this glorious world God has created that is broken and twisted and still glorious, that Christ has entered into, but he hasn't returned yet. And it's not all put back together. It's not all glorious. It's not all solved. So we live in the struggle between the cross and Christ's return. And that shows up in our marriages. But it can be done well. And I believe that God's main approach to help us do that well is the deep connection that we share with each other. Fear of risking relationship failure. Another hindrance. Fear of betrayal, fear of painful losses. We have good reasons to fear those things. Also then fear of risking relationship success. Rather leave an escape hatch than to be all the way in the marriage. Fear of risking opening your heart. The idea of being naked and completely known, it's not that attractive. Because probably all of us have been in situations where we've been open and we've paid a price. Where somebody's misused, have betrayed that information or that us, actually. And fear of risking honesty. Those are all kind of related. Usually when we're afraid of risking honesty, it's not that we lie. We just don't say as much as we could, especially about what we feel, which feels more fragile, feels less protected, feels like we're the only ones that can really protect it. But 4.5 years ago, my wife and I were able to adopt one case, and free to a good home in the other, 2 horses. And through a positive, really positive experience with a horse whisperer type person, he taught us all about how you actually relate to a horse on the basis of what is their nature and understanding them. So I started to talk about horses and making application to people in class, and a student sent me the link for this video. And when I watched it, I was just like, oh, that's it. In 45 seconds, I know, because it was like, how long did that take? Bill Barnes really captures it. He says it here. Those are the main elements of what he says. Sorry it was so hard to hear. The number one thing that motivates a horse to be with you is peace. And that also is with people. From the horse whisperer, I thought of it as trust, but they're interchangeable in this case, and I think it's true with people as well. When you establish trust with a horse, everybody's peaceful. They're peaceful, and you can feel it, and it impacts you. And peace looks like, so motivates a horse to be with you like that with people. So he ends up talking about, so what are the people like who people are drawn to, who want to be around? They're settled, they're grounded, they know where they're going, they're directed, they have self-confidence, and they're trying to be a servant. If you think about those things in the context of peace, it makes so much sense. That if you have a relationship starting with God, but where you have this sense of, I can enter into this relationship and feel the peace of His love for me, His acceptance of, His knowing me completely and accepting me anyway. That in these later years in my life has been the most important piece of growth, is to accept that He accepts me, even though He knows me. You see how different that is from how I've operated so much in my life, like I was talking about, where I was afraid to be known because I couldn't believe I'd be accepted. And that God's been breaking through that. So most of my life, I've been a Christian all my life. But most of my life I've held God off because I didn't want Him to know me because He might go away. So I held Him away. It's a different thing to be, yes, He accepts me even though He knows me. But each one of us is a beloved child. That generates peace. It also ends up with a sense of being settled, being okay with who you are. Doesn't mean you're not looking for God to keep growing you, but you're okay. You're settled. That will draw other people to you because they can feel that peace. Grounded. I'm thinking of verse, where is it? It's in Paul, one of the epistles. Grounded in love. Know where they're going. I don't think that means the specific destination. I think that's more, the way I interpret it, more about the direction you're going. Following in the way that God has for us. That may change. May expand into things that we never expected. And we're directed. Is very connected to know where they're going, have self-confidence. It's the right word, but we could misinterpret it. It's not so much confidence in me as it is confidence in who God has made me to be. It's different. And also trying to be a servant to those around them. Because I think everything's relational, going back to self-confidence, I believe that self-confidence and that confidence in who God has made me to be is actually a product of relationship with Him. As we live and learn that, it's not about where I've arrived and how gifted I am. Again, back to our speaker a couple of days ago, focusing more on our calling than our giftedness. So that self-confidence, you could do it as a focus on your giftedness, and that's more hollow than focus on the calling that you have that isn't dependent upon your giftedness. It's dependent upon God looking at you and saying, you can do this and you're ready for this. It doesn't matter that you don't have everything you need to do. I'm calling you to it. And if you persevere, exercise the courage, keep at it, I will relate with you and I will lead you in the process. And we will get this done. And there's nothing more naked without shame assuring than to know that God is saying, we'll do this. And it's really not, God's working, and He kind of happens to use us a little bit. It's really, nope, just like to Adam and Eve where He says, take dominion. You're my vice regents. You have a royal role, not apart from me, but that's what I have for you. And there's something that honors who we are, even though we are who we are, all at the same time. Okay, so understand the nature of the horse. I'm not trying to do that. And people. When are we supposed to end?
1:15.
1:15. Okay, not too bad.
And they did their survey.
Right.
Here, like, we can just
Okay.
ask them.
I think I'm okay. Understand the nature of the horse and the people. I'm going to try to quickly do this, but it's really important. It might not seem like it. I'm going to start talking about horses and horse trainers and horse whisperers and things like that. That experience of Scott, the horse whisperer, coming out to our little tiny farm, as we were having severe difficulties with our first horse, she's acting out in all kinds of ways. We didn't know what was going on. Scared us to death, rearing up when you get close to her, and that's a mighty big, I mean, I'm tall enough, but it's still a mighty big thing in front of you that you're stepping back to make sure you don't get those two front legs with close to 1,300 pounds behind it on yourself. It can kill you, and I know those stories, or she can. The first thing that Scott taught us, the horses prey, and it's watching for predators. It's always on guard. One of the things Scott said was, it's hard for people to understand this, especially if you watch the relationship that people can have with their horse. Horse is never fully domesticated. I have lots of friends that say, oh, that's like my dog. And I'm thinking, not really. Because your dog gets really fully domesticated. Horse doesn't. The difference is, my wife likes to say it this way, it's a new horse every day. They have great memories. They know who you are, they know everything you've done, but they want to make sure that it's still true today. Awful lot of spouses are that way, like all of us. Where Sue Johnson in EFT says, spouses are always asking, are you there for me? I think that's correct. This example from the universe in horses that applies to people is a support for what Sue Johnson is observing. The horses prey to predators. So when we walk in the barn in the morning, we have been taught what to look for. It might just be those ears that pick up and they're perked and they're standing straight up. Doesn't mean they're scared. It means, but they're watching. They're really on alert. Sometimes if they're out in the pasture especially, you'll see them, they're just standing, their feet are planted and they're as tall can be, and those ears are up and their head is up as high as they can. And it's sort of I'm on alert and I'm sending you a message. You really want to mess with me? Lots of things in nature posture, and it's posturing in that moment. But the horse is always on guard. Horse is watching to see if you can be trusted again. So do spouses. We're always watching to see, can we be trusted again? Can the other be trusted? It's like there is a new horse every day. They need to be reassured regularly. So do spouses. Well, there are probably lots of jokes out there about that, as men basically complain about the fact that their wife always has to be reassured. I told her 20 years ago, why does she need me to keep saying it? But men, the jokes go both ways. All spouses are similar in that they can take on the tendency of those that are prey, needing to be reassured regularly that they're safe with you and that you are sure for them. If we're able to, on a pretty consistent basis, have that deep, safe connection, to be really engaged, so we feel safe and trusted. This doesn't come up so much. But this is the natural thing that we have to wrestle with. We see it in Adam. What's recorded in Scripture after God comes and starts asking questions about, did you eat the fruit of the tree? And when he gets around to Adam, you know what Adam said. It's the woman you gave me. Not my fault. It's on you two. That was kind of like being the prey in the crosshairs in terms of Adam's experience there. That's not what God was doing. I mean, God, after all, is coming after them in a beneficial way, pursuing them in a good way in the context of their sin. But Adam's afraid, partly because their sin had damaged the relationship. Spouses, whether they know it or not, are watching to see if their spouse is safe and can be trusted. And you can be like, yeah, but I've shown them. Why? It's like, well, think about the horses. You know, we all have a little bit of prey in us. Horses know it. If I could take you into our barn, my wife has spent 5 minutes, maybe 10, in the barn that day, particularly with her horse, Missy. And you could see some things happen. It would be a little less likely that you would see it because you're there. And Missy's got her, she's very curious, but she's also, you know, she's keeping her eye on you. So she might not quite be as focused with Carol Ann, but if she got enough comfortable with, you know, relaxed with you being around, one of the things you would see was Carol Ann might just lean a little bit forward and Missy would come forward and put her forehead to forehead, and they would just stand there. And you would know, you would feel the love between that animal and that woman and that woman and that animal. Even though that animal's prey. And tomorrow, Carol Ann will have to reestablish trust for anything like that to happen again. That's a pretty good picture of spouses, of what it's like. And we don't understand that very well. If we're going to really help couples connect deeply, it's necessary to be aware of. It's a great, great challenge. It begins with helping couples see that their lack of connection is the real problem. It's not that we can't figure out how to do the checkbook, or we don't know, you know, we don't have sex when I want to, and she doesn't seem to care to like it or want it. It's whatever problem you can think of. Those are real problems. But they're the tip of the iceberg, typically, one way to look at it. The iceberg itself is much more about connection. In good, consistent, deeper connection, couples work out the problems. Because they don't see the problem as tearing down the connection. When the connection is active and deep enough, there's a resistance to seeing the problems as destructive. They see the problems as problems, something that together they can work with, relate together about, and work on those things. So indirectly, you're still dealing with problems, but you're doing it through trying to strengthen the connection. So to talk collaboratively is the solution to problems. Such talking is more likely when connection is strong. Connection is made stronger by collaboratively talking, by working together. That collaborative talking is going to look like creating space for each one. We'll start with one to share more of their experience, more of what they're feeling in a situation. And the other one responding to that before they, not responding at it, but responding that they hear and understand, or ask questions so they can understand better, so that we stay at one thing and have some back and forth about one thing before we then go to the other one that says, well, this is how I'm experiencing this. Sometimes spouses discover they're experiencing it in very similar ways. That can be easier, but they need help to slow down enough to not just be saying, well, this is me, this is me, this is me, this is me, and in the process, no one knows if anybody's hearing anything. And in that process, you tend to stay in your head. Such talk can be thought of as solving the moment rather than solving the problem. Does that language make sense to you? because I love it. That as counselors, we have a couple, maybe they're redoing the argument for us, to recognize this is a moment that needs to be solved, not go after solving the problem. In other words, solve the process. Help them adjust the process so that they're communicating better, but communicating more fully, communicating about what they feel as well as what they think. Intimacy may be just a sentence away. That's from Daniel Weil. One of those things that stays in the back of my mind all the time. It's actually the intimacy may be just a sentence away. He goes on to say, but it's hard to find the sentence. The needed conversation begins with a confiding or acknowledging sentence that could invite the spouse to respond in a similar way. Weil talks about there are only three things you can do in a significant relational moment. You can attack or defend. Defensiveness is like attacking, has the same effect. It's an active act against. You can withdraw or you can confide. So Weil gives the example of himself, Dan, traveling home after work. Something's happened in his day that's been really exciting. He wants to share it with his wife. He comes in the back door, the house, his wife's on the phone. She's having a wonderful conversation with a friend. That's okay. He can wait. And then that conversation continues and continues and continues. She finally gets off the phone. That's that moment where he has a choice, one of three choices. Now, most of us make the choice without thinking about it. It's a habit. Habits are things you do, patterns that you don't think about anymore. His habit might be to attack or defend. So he might say, how come you always have so much to say to your friends and so little to say to me? I saw a few of you nod like, yeah, you could see yours, yeah, me too. Which is a statement, Weil says, when we attack or defend, that turns our spouse into a little bit of an enemy. Yeah. Or when Daniel comes in and Gail gets off the phone, Gail's the friend, Alice gets off the phone, Daniel might say, anything good on TV tonight? Withdrawal. Now, the problem with withdrawal is everybody knows it, but nobody challenges it. Because withdrawal invites more withdrawal. So Alice's response might be, I don't know, let's see. And then they go watch TV, but there's this thing in the room that they're not talking about, and they kind of know it, hoping that it goes away. Or when Daniel comes home and Alice gets off the phone in her conversation with Gail, he might confide with her, I'm a little jealous of the conversation you were having with Gail right now. Now, instead of turning Alice into an enemy by attack or a stranger by withdrawal, you're turning Alice into an ally that invites a confiding response. And that cycle goes in a very, very different way. So I've said here, another thing important to do is help couples see each other better. Tune in, curiosity, explore first, use questions first. Help couples hear each other better. Assume their spouse wants to be understood. Help couples remain curious about what's important to their spouse. Help couples hear the heartfelt feeling or hope underneath the accusation. And help couples accept each other better. So see, hear, and accept, which is the heart of connection, to see, hear, and accept. Help spouses practice honoring the differences of each other. That's a challenge. Help others allow their spouse to influence them. Requires the maturity needed to be open about your own shortcomings. Help wives and husbands repent from the assumption that all would be good if their husband or wife would just become like them. help spouses grow continually. Oh, good, we have some time to talk. So I raced through the end there, intentionally, so that we could have some time to maybe together put this all, there's a space here. I moved this up on the original thing so you can see the books. But there's a space there, that's for you to fill in that space of, what do you make of this? What hits you as important? What hits you as hard? What's confusing? What's clear and maybe most helpful? Talk to each other a little bit. How might you put this into play?
Can you put it down a little bit?
I sure can.
See it here. Thank you.
I'm going to cover up the help spouses grow. What's the first one?
See. Please.
Yeah. Right. See, hear, accept. I took the see, hear, and accept from Brene Brown. Some of you know that name. Brene Brown's books are very helpful. They tend to be a progression. Her first book was on shame. I haven't read that one. Her second book was on the gifts of imperfection. I have students read that every year. Little book. It's about that thick. And it's just loaded. Then there are a series of books where she's continued to expand her thought as she, based on research that she's doing with people. And a lot of her writing right now is based on a collection of people, a lot of people that she's interviewed and done work with who are doing life well. And so she writes a lot about what helps us do life well. And one of the things that she recognizes is that people flourish when they have deep connection in their relationships. She's not talking just about marriage. And her definition, it's a beautiful definition of connection. It's longer than this. The first part of it is that connection is the energy that develops between two people when they feel seen, heard, and accepted. The other two parts are actually the same thing expressed in different terms. When they feel seen, heard, and accepted. So I borrowed the seen, heard, or see, hear, and accept from Brene Brown. I think she's right. And I think it's easy, pretty easy to understand. And it's relatively easy to pay attention to yourself and kind of recognize when we've stopped seeing or listening, and maybe in the process of stopped accepting, and we've shifted over to our own defending or our own withdrawing. If we're going to get back to confiding, try to get back to acceptance. Excuse me, connection. I didn't say that right. If we want to get back to confiding, get back to connection. They work together. And how do you get back to connection? Wait a minute. Let me listen better. Let me see you. Let me really understand. And let me, in that act, you are accepting. I'm going to add one piece and then I'm going to be quiet and wait for you to contribute. Early in my work experience, I worked as a social worker, working with families, a government agency that took kids away to protect them, placed them in foster homes, and then in our case, we worked hard to get those kids back, work with parents to make improvements so they could get their kids back, or make another permanent plan. Foster homes temporary. Sometimes some kids stay in foster homes for 10 years, but it's really temporary, and they end up acting out or something in the teen years, and then they leave that home and they end up not having a family at all, actually. And after a couple of years, I became a supervisor, and I was really too young to be a supervisor. And my agency kind of knew that. I think maybe I was the best option they had. If someone older had applied, I probably wouldn't have gotten the job, and that might have been a good thing, I don't know. So they sent me to a conference on supervision. And that man made a statement that has stayed with me my whole life. It's one of the best things I ever heard. And it really put my own growth in a different trajectory, a different direction. Well, what he said was, he's talking about supervision, but applies to everything. He said, people think that the good supervisors are the ones who do it by the book, meaning follow the rules. He said, no, the good supervisor is the one who shortens the distance between their mistakes and when they correct them. His name was Lawrence Schulman, professor at Boston University. Yeah. The good supervisor or counselor or person is the one who shortens the distance between their mistakes and when they correct them. If you pursue that, try to apply that in your life, some good things will happen. One is you get less worried about your mistakes. You come to learn that your mistakes do not destroy necessarily. If you're afraid of your mistakes, they're more likely to really mess things up. If you accept the fact that I will make mistakes, the point's going to be correct them. If you accept the fact that you will make mistakes, then you're actually prepared to have your eyes open for when you make them. And that's a really good thing. I really believe that my best moments in counseling have been when I've made mistakes and been honest about it. So to say, sometimes it's small. Sometimes it's there were a couple of options of which way to go, and I chose one. I made that choice. And 5 minutes later, it's like, we're going nowhere. If I'm not open to, admit my mistakes, to see them first of all, then I'll keep pressing and working really, really hard to try to make that thing work. Often when I'm working harder than they are, it's because I'm trying to make my stuff look good, rather than admit, that wasn't the best choice. I missed something. So it can seem like it's a bad thing to stop and to say to the people you're working with, you're talking with, you know what, back there 5 minutes ago, when we were kind of talking, is it this or this? And I said, yeah, let's talk about this. I don't think that's taking us anywhere. I think that was a mistake. Can we go back? Or is there something else that's come up into your mind? Let them choose. I believe that the reason that so often it becomes a really good moment is that it shows them a couple of things. One is that I'm a real person. I'm not an expert. And they might think they want an expert that can give them all the answers. But that's really not the best thing. They need a real person who connects with them and cares. And that's working with them to help them figure out, how are we going to meet life's challenges better? At least that much is what's happening when we're shortening the distance between our mistakes and when we correct them. I think another thing that's communicated in a moment like that is you trust them. Many people come into counseling and they have some pretty serious problems a lot of times, and they're feeling a lot of shame. It's taken a lot for them to get the courage to actually come in and see you. And then all of a sudden they're there, and they have to tell you this stuff that they don't want to even say out loud. They don't like to admit it out loud. And pastors that can be harder for pastors than for others, because you're their pastor. And now they're going to come and they're going to say, well, this is what's really happening in our life. A lot of times, Sunday morning is about never letting anybody know what's really happening. And then it gets so desperate that have to talk to somebody, and then they come in, but it's still hard. It's really shame producing. But that concept of keeping the shortening the distance between your mistakes and when you correct them can be so powerful in this process of how do we help you all connect better? Because that's a process of us being open-hearted so they can connect better with us. And it's good modeling as well.